Hello everyone, and welcome back to another dinner video. So starting off the week, I made this taco pasta, and as you can tell, I used the shell pasta for this, and I just got that boiling while I waited for my cashews to sit, which are in the little silver pot in the back. I boiled some water and then threw those in and turned the heat off and let those sit for about 10 minutes, which is what the timer on the stove is. And that is going to be the base of our taco sauce that goes over the taco pasta. And it's just 2 handfuls of cashews soaked for 10 minutes. And then after that timer went off, I just went ahead and drained them and set them to the side. Once I was ready to make my sauce, I just dumped in those cashews to my blender, along with a couple cloves of garlic, a bunch of lime juice, some homemade taco seasoning, which I will leave the recipe down below in the description box, and then a little bit of cilantro and a little bit of that pasta water, which I just used the pot that I used for the cashews to scoop out to save on dishes. And then I just blended it all up and set it aside while I prepare the next step. By this time my pasta was done, so I just went ahead and drained it and added in the equivalent of 1 can of corn and the equivalent of 1 can of black beans. I make my own from scratch, so that's why they're over there in a little container. And then once that was mixed in, I just added a little bit of salsa, not even a 1/4 cup, and that taco sauce, and just mix it all together. Next up was just an incredibly simple taco night with just some taco seasoned lentils that I cooked up earlier that day, and I just topped my tacos with sour cream, cheese, lettuce, and then I made a side of refried beans to go along with them. And I love to get the no fat Great Value version. I think they taste amazing. And then I just warm it up on the stove with a little bit of coconut milk mixed in and some of the cheese that you can see in the background, the Follow Your Heart. And I just use maybe like a palm full of that cheese and then just mix it on low heat until it's warm and bubbly, and it's so good. So the next recipe is chicken and dumplings, and for some reason I cannot perfect this recipe. No matter how much I try, the dumplings just aren't turning out good. So I think until then, I'm not going to give the recipe. But once I do, I'll definitely do that and give the recipe, because the recipe itself is good, just the dumplings are not good. So just until then, enjoy this montage of clips. And now on to my favorite meal of this week, which was copycat Chipotle Bowls using tofu. So I just made a simple marinade out of oil, these Chipotle peppers, which next time I think I'm going to blend them before I put them in just to get a better consistency, some cumin, a lot of lime juice, some salt and garlic pepper, a little bit of tomato paste, maybe like a tablespoon or so, and then I also added some water. and just mixed it all together to form this little marinade concoction. And I just cut my tofu up into little cubes and let it soak in this. And I'm basically just cutting these peppers up to give it a better texture because these are really huge chunks. And it just blends better when you do it this way, trust me. So all you do is let this soak. I only did it while I was making the rice and their other stuff, but I would recommend doing it at least 2 hours, if not 4. But it's okay to do it for like 30-45 minutes, which is about the time it took me to do the rest of the stuff. And then of course I was rushing because I always am, it seems these days, and I just dumped it all into my air fryer without like taking the pieces out, and I don't recommend that. But I just air fried it. What did I do? Oh yeah, 400 for I think 20 minutes is what it ended up being. You want them to look like they're done, like crispy, or not crispy, you want them to look just like golden and be a little firmer. And then I made some cilantro lime rice to go along with it and just layered everything. So of course the rice, the tofu, some of this tofutti sour cream, which is actually a really good replacement. I really like it. And then some black beans, lettuce, guacamole, and that's it. But this is one of my favorite meals, and I love when we make it. So I need to make it more actually. So this recipe stemmed from me not wanting to be wasteful, but not wanting to eat the meal that I had planned originally, which I had originally planned to make butternut squash soup, and then I had originally planned to make mac and cheese for lunch one day. Neither of those ended up getting made, so I ended up just combining them and making butternut squash mac and cheese. So all I did was cut it open and of course scrape the seeds out, and my toddler loves to help, but it is quite a hassle when he's in the kitchen with me. But just scoop the seeds out and put it in your air fryer until it is fully done. I think I did 390 for 15 minutes. And of course you want to flip them halfway through so that way they get an even coating. Once it's done, you just dump it in your food processor or blender. I would recommend a food processor. I can't find my blades for my food processor. We just recently moved like a month and a half ago, and I still haven't been able to find them, so I had to use my blender. And because of that, I had to add a little bit of milk when I really didn't want to. But you just want to make a thick puree because you are going to add stuff to this to make it your sauce to go on the mac and cheese. Once you puree it, you're just going to put it in a saucepan over the stove with 2 cups of milk and just combine that, whisk it until all the lumps are out. And I would recommend doing this in the biggest saucepan you have. I did this in a 9 or 10 inch, I think it is, and it was way too small for what I wanted, so I recommend doing it in a bigger one. And then for seasonings, I just added garlic powder, thyme, sage, rosemary, and cayenne pepper, and nutmeg. Although I would leave out the nutmeg because I only added like 2 shakes of it, and it was still incredibly overpowering, and I'm just not that big of a nutmeg fan. So if you aren't a fan like I am, then I would leave it out. And then I also added like a half a cup of nutritional yeast to mimic the cheeses that were in the original recipe, because this ended up being like a copycat Trader Joe's version, because I was looking for a recipe to base mine off of, and that was the only thing that came up. So I ended up adding like a half a cup of nutritional yeast because the original recipe uses like Parmesan and Gouda and another cheese, and I of course didn't want to add that. And then I just let it simmer on low until my pasta was done, and I added gradually, of course, I think a half a cup to 3/4 of a cup of water You're of course just going to want to go by what consistency you want your sauce to be. And this is why I recommend using the biggest saucepan you have, because it was not fun trying to keep this in the skillet while I was making dinner, because of course I was rushing again on this night. And when you add your pasta to it, it was horrible trying to move the pasta around. You can see it made a giant mess, and I'm just not all about that. So, but it was not very good at all. I think I'm just not a butternut squash fan, or it might have just been like the recipes I've tried haven't been that good, but I think I'm going to step away from this particular squash until I find like the most to die for recipe. And last but not least is me just not wanting to waste food. So I had this like half a bag of spinach left and a half a bunch of kale left and some leftover pasta. So I went ahead and made a pesto sauce of my own, because I don't like the store-bought pestos. Even the like Trader Joe's one, I do not like it. It has a weird taste to it. I'm not a big fan of basil. But I just combined everything in a blender and then poured it over top of cooked pasta. It was super simple. And of course I didn't really measure, but I think you can get a pretty good idea of the estimate that I used just by these clips.